Welcome, welcome, welcome. Okay. Let me just do the little Marianne spiel here about the Course in Miracles before we launch in. A Course in Miracles is a self-study program of spiritual psychotherapy that consists of a textbook, a workbook, and a manual for teachers. The workbook is 365 days of daily meditation, and it is really about training our minds in such a way that we are open to what the text teaches us. So the Course in Miracles is not a religion, but it does address universal spiritual themes. It is really about the relinquishment of a thought system based on fear and the acceptance of a thought system based on love. Now, let's talk about what a miracle is before we really launch into this. A Course in Miracles really ties in with a lot of new thought and teaches a lot of the same basic kinds of principles. It does, however, make a differentiation between what the Course calls miracles and magic. Magic is really what we would call the laws of mind. Even things like when the Course in Miracles is talking about cause and effect, in one sense, that is a kind of magic, that we really are creating the world that we think about. And so that's one huge aspect of the Course, and certainly a huge aspect of New Thought in general. And we use those laws consciously. That's the point, really, of studying these things, is to use those laws consciously, because you can't not use them. We're using them all the time, a lot of times unconsciously. So our real work, and certainly what a lot of the workbook is about, is starting to recognize what you're thinking. But when the Course in Miracles talks about miracles, it's very clear that miracles don't necessarily have anything to do with externalized effects and what happens in the world. So a lot of things that we might say, oh my gosh, that was a miracle, the Course in Miracles would not necessarily say that's a miracle. So what is a miracle? Well, in the very beginning, in those 50 meanings of miracles, it goes over all of those things, but probably most significantly, it says, miracles are expressions of love. The real miracle is the love that inspires them. In this sense, everything that comes from love is a miracle. So anything that is really about the love between beings is a miracle. It may not have observable effects. There are lots of things that have observable effects that the world calls a miracle, such as maybe somebody's cancer is spontaneously healed, maybe a parking space opens up, lots of things. In the beginning of metaphysics, we call that princes' palaces and parking spaces. Right? You start to learn how to use your mind to start to, move the energy, because consciousness animates matter. And so that's that whole aspect of cause and effect that really is what most of New Thought teaches, and certainly what the Course in Miracles teaches as well. But any situation that we are calling a miracle that does not have love in it is not a miracle. So any situation where something happened, but we still perceive anybody within the story as guilty, that is not a miracle. So if we're blaming somebody, if we had this miracle with our asshole boss, that's not a miracle. Because if you're still thinking of him as your asshole boss, that's not a miracle. Right? That miracles are about the relinquishment of guilt, the relinquishment of these attack thoughts. So I want to read a little bit here from chapter 12. You could really spend about 100 years on chapter 12 alone. It's only 20 pages long, but you could go into this for a long, long time. This is chapter 12, the Holy Spirit's curriculum, the judgment of the Holy Spirit. You have been told not to make error real, and the way to do this is very simple. If you want to believe in error, you would have to make it real because it is not true. But truth is real in its own right, and to believe in truth, you do not have to do anything. Understand that you do not respond to anything directly, but to your interpretation of it. Your interpretation thus becomes the justification for the response. Now, he's going to say something really important here. I want you to listen to this. If you don't get anything else tonight. That is why analyzing the motives of others is hazardous to you. I'm sure nobody here analyzes the motives of others. But I need this talk, so I'm going to talk about this. That is why analyzing the motives of others is hazardous to you. If you decide that someone is really trying to attack you or desert you or enslave you, you will respond as if he had actually done so, having made his error real to you. To interpret error is to give it power, and having done this, you will overlook truth. The analysis of ego motivations is very complicated, very obscuring, and never without your own ego involvement. The whole process represents a clear-cut attempt to demonstrate your own ability to understand what you perceive. This is shown by the fact that you react to your interpretations as if they were correct. You may then control your reactions behaviorally, but not emotionally. So we're smart enough that we know in a certain situation where we're attacking someone in our mind, we know enough usually not to say anything. So behaviorally, we've cleaned it up. Right? Those are the fights we get into, though, anyhow. Marianne used to tell this great story where she talked about this guy that she was dating, and she said, I had really gotten my behavior down. I knew, not to call him all the time and not to be needy and all of this stuff, but I still had my mental hooks in him. And one day he said to me, stop leaning on me. And I said, what? I haven't done anything. I haven't called you. I haven't this. He said, I don't know what you're doing, but I can feel it. And that's life. Most of our communication is energetic. That's why we always want to, a couple of years ago, there was that book by, I can't remember, My Stroke of Insight or whatever, by Jill Bolte Taylor, where she talked about when she had that stroke and she was lying in the hospital, and even when she could not speak, when people would come in the room, she could sense their energy. And she could sense basically the energy they were bringing into the room, whether the energy was, oh, she'll never speak again, this is horrible, this is awful. And eventually, I think she had a sign put up that said, be conscious of the energy you're bringing in here. Wouldn't that be great to have a sign like that everywhere you go? Be conscious of the energy you are bringing in here, right? Because the Course in Miracles says our behavior is determined by our self-perception. So just getting down our behavior is not it. We start with our consciousness, our conscious energy. What's the energy I want to bring to this situation? That's why in the opening meditation, we did that thing of how do you want to feel in these situations? The ego mind is obsessed with what are you going to do? What should we do? What should we do? What are we going to do? What did you do? Right? The ego is all about doing. Right? But the most important thing is not what we're going to do, it's the consciousness before we do anything. Because when we are in what the Course in Miracles would call right-minded, or we're in that Christ consciousness or Buddha consciousness or God consciousness, when we're in that place, what you find is, and we all know this at some level, is you can make a lot of mistakes that will basically be overlooked or easily forgiven. If you're in your insane mind, and insane is anytime you perceive guilt in yourself or anybody else, so you're controlling, you're manipulating, you're strategizing, you're resisting, whatever it is you're doing mentally, you can do everything perfectly and it still won't fucking work out. Don't you know that? Haven't you had that experience? But I did everything perfectly. And this idiot can't do anything right. And he got promoted. Right? Because it's consciousness. It's the energy you're bringing, right? And so that's why it's talking about the errors, when we make people's errors real and we make our own. Remember, your thoughts never leave your mind. The Course in Miracles says ideas do not leave their source. So your subconscious mind doesn't know there are other people in the universe. It has no idea there are other people. So everything that you think, your subconscious thinks you're thinking about you. Right? Every attack thought you have about someone else never leaves your mind. It doesn't hurt them at all. Right? The Course in Miracles says, what you recognize in a brother, you are strengthening in yourself. Some of you should probably just take a week off from talking. Just don't say anything. Not saying anything this week. All right. You may then control your reactions behaviorally, but not emotionally. This would obviously be a split or an attack on the integrity of your mind, pitting one level within it against another. There is but one interpretation of motivation that makes sense. So we're not just describing the problem, he's going to tell us what to do. There is but one interpretation of motivation that makes sense, and because it is the Holy Spirit's judgment, it requires no effort at all on your part. Every loving thought is true. Everything else is an appeal for healing and help, regardless of the form it takes. So anytime anybody is saying something loveless to you, attacking you, withdrawing to you, all the things that we interpret as you're doing this, you're doing that, you're doing this, you're doing that. If it is not love, it is a call for love. Now, what we get tied up in is, it's not, see, the deal is sometimes people will say to me, someone said this to me recently, they come up to me and said, well, I'm afraid because I don't have a job right now and I can't pay my rent, and so I have a good reason to be afraid. So I'm doing all this stuff, but it's not helping because I have a good reason to be afraid. Well, this is exactly what the Course in Miracles says is our major mistake. Is not that we have fear or that we have attack thoughts, it's that we justify and validate them. We defend them, right? Instead of just saying, I'm afraid, we say, but I have a right to be afraid, I should be afraid. We start to build our case, so we're basically defending our limitations, right? So the Course of Miracles is not saying you should never have any fear thoughts or have any attack thoughts. It says you have no fear and attack thoughts that you would keep, that you would justify, that you would defend. So what do? You surrender them. Right? Marianne will always say, you know, the Holy Spirit, when you give your life to the Holy Spirit does not join you in some huge cover-up. Right? Where we're pretending to be spiritual now, we're pushing down all the negativity and fear, and then we just smile over it. I call that the pink icing on a shit cake. It's so pretty, but something is wrong. It smells funny in here, I understand. Right? But that we bring those things out, that we are willing to bring them out into the open, to say, I am afraid, this is why I'm afraid, and I'm willing to see things differently. I want to see things differently. One of the really powerful lessons in the workbook is, I want the peace of God. And it says, to say these words is nothing, but to mean these words is everything. I've been saying lately, I want the peace of God. I don't really give a shit about anything else. I just want the peace of God. Because everything else pretty much falls in line if you make that your major goal. I want the peace of God. There are really three things, basically, that the Course in Miracles are always talking about, which is our peace, our joy, and our love. But the Course in Miracles says that the problem we have is that we seek those things and we already have them. The issue is not that we don't have the peace of God, that we don't have the love of God, that we don't have the joy of God. It's that we keep activating other things instead. So if we want the peace and love and joy, that's what we have to activate. And then we look in every situation and say, is this worth my peace or my joy or my love? Remember, all the ego wants to do is steal your joy in this moment. Not forever. It just wants to shit on today a little bit. That's all. I just want to ruin this moment. Right? It's not about ruining your whole life. It's ruining each moment as it comes. Right? When I first really realized this thing of, that's all it is the ego just wants to steal your joy, then you start to realize that it's not really stealing our joy, it's that we renounce it in that moment. So when I first got this, I was driving out of my apartment onto Santa Monica Boulevard and then to make a left turn on San Vicente, which is, like you have to be alert and aware, okay? So I was waiting for the oncoming traffic to stop coming so that I could turn. But the person behind me did not care about that. He really saw that as my problem. So he started blowing his horn for me to drive into oncoming traffic. And as I went to give him a sign that I had heard him, now let's talk about what this is. What we're talking about, what I'm about to describe to you, is a holy instant. Because before I did, I said, oh no, do not give him your joy. Because you will let this steal your joy, this moment. That's what a holy instant is. A holy instant is that when you keep studying these things seriously, as in I'm applying them to each moment of my life, the holy instant is basically the experience that we have of a widening of the time gap between stimulus and response. The time between the time when the thing happens and you hit send on the computer, where you go, maybe not. Might not be the thing to do. Sometimes you can be, if you're really in a good place, sometimes I will have a Post-it by my keyboard that says, be kind. Be kind. Right? Kenneth Wapnick says that the Course in Miracles can be boiled down to two simple words, be kind. But sometimes I'm not that evolved. So there's another Post-it that says, don't be an asshole. Sometimes that's the highest I can get to some days. It's just, don't be an asshole, okay? You might not be a saint today, but just don't be an asshole, right? All right. Well, that's enough of that, really. I said before that what you project or extend is up to you, but you must do one or the other, for that is a law of mind, and you must look in before you look out. As you look in, you choose the guide for seeing, and then you look out and behold the witnesses. This is why you find what you seek. So in Course in Miracles terms, when we turn within, you can use different language, but the Course in Miracles basically says we are turning within all the time, and we're either consulting the ego or we're consulting the Holy Spirit. And that becomes our guide then. And whoever we have turned to will bear witness to their world. So the ego will show us a world of attack and hatred and fear and lack and on and on and on. And the Holy Spirit will show us a world of peace and joy and love. But we get to choose. If we don't choose consciously, we'll choose by default, based on our mood. I'll see how I feel. Maybe I want a miracle, maybe I don't. Right? We'll see if anyone seems guilty today, and if they deserve my mercy or not. Right? So that's why the Course in Miracles teaches us really, first thing in the morning, choose your guide. Then keep choosing over and over and over again in each situation. And that's why we did that little practice of start to think about how you want to feel. Because whatever that feeling is, that will determine which guide. Right? If what you want to feel is joy and love and peace and so on, then obviously that's going to be a higher consciousness and a higher energy that's going to be guiding you than what I want is for them to call me back at 5 and tell me that that was not enough. Like, it's always about, with the ego, it's always about something out there changing so that I can be happy. Well, one of the reasons for that is that, let's read this. I like to read this every now and then from the workbook. This is lesson 71. I spent almost a year teaching from this lesson till people were sick to death of it. Only God's plan for salvation will work. You may not realize that the ego has set up a plan for salvation in opposition to God's. It is this plan in which you believe. Since it is the opposite of God's, you also believe that to accept God's plan in place of the ego's is to be damned. This sounds preposterous, of course, yet after we have considered just what the ego's plan is, perhaps you will realize that however preposterous it may be, you do believe in it. The ego's plan for salvation centers around holding grievances. It maintains that if someone else spoke or acted differently in some external situation, or if an event were changed, you would be saved. Thus, the source of salvation is constantly perceived as outside of yourself. Each grievance you hold is a declaration and an assertion in which you believe that says, if this were different, I would be saved. The change of mind necessary for salvation is thus demanded of everyone and everything except yourself. The role assigned to your own mind in the plan, then, is simply to determine what, other than yourself, must change if you are to be saved. According to this insane plan, any perceived source of salvation is acceptable, provided that it will not work. That's the ego's only thing is, we have a plan, and the only rule for the plan is that it can't work. That's really the goal. You know, the Course in Miracles is really... In this whole chapter 12, the whole essence of it is to just recognize when you're insane, which is a big chunk of the day, usually, for a lot of us. But it's just to own that. Of like, any time I am in any kind of fear or attack mode, I'm in terms of this, I'm insane, basically. Even if I'm right, even if I'm justified, even if they started it. That's always the one, right? But I was loving, they started it. Right? It's the gathering of evidence. And of course, what the Course in Miracles says about all this evidence that we've gathered, and this is, of course, not just about other people, it's about ourselves, too. You know, the Course teaches us if you're condemning others, you cannot escape your own self-condemnation. It makes no difference. See, the ego doesn't care who's guilty, just so someone is. That's why it goes back and forth all the time. Sometimes it's, I'm a piece of shit. And then you hold that for a while, and that feels bad. And then your ego goes, well, this feels too bad. Find someone else. And then you go, I am an asshole, but it's her fault. Then that feels better for a while. So we just go back and forth with that a lot of times, interrupted by moments of letting go and peace. I've been lecturing in Santa Barbara since 1990. And I lectured there for many years, twice a week, in a theater like this, and there was a balcony like this. And up in the balcony, there was a woman who would bring her little boy, and he would just run around, and he had like little cars and things that he would play with and stuff. And I don't know, he was maybe 8 years old, I'm going to say, something like that. And so I would do the same meditation all the time. And one day he came home from school, and you don't think they're listening to these stupid spiritual lectures. He was just here because she didn't have a babysitter. And so one day he came home from school, and instead of running around and playing, make a lot of noise, he just went right into his bedroom, and it was quiet, which, you're like, what? That can't be good. So she waited a few minutes, she went in the bedroom, and he was just sitting on the bed. And she said, "Billy, what are you doing?" He said, "I'm letting go of the day, like Jacob says." Now, you don't even know what's so fucking funny about that, really, is that what's really hilarious about that is that, people like his mother would come once a week to hear me speak, and I would speak on Tuesday nights. So I can't even tell you, now I only speak there once a month, but I can't even tell you how many full-grown adults would say to me at some point, basically some version of, "Oh, I'm so glad you're here because I've been waiting all week to come here and let go." So you can't just close your eyes and let go of the day unless I tell you to? Is that what I don't understand, right? See, that's the difference between children and adults. Children don't give a shit about philosophy. They care about practical application. Something either works or it doesn't work. That's it. They don't care about the philosophy behind it. It either works or it doesn't work. So the children would actually practice it themselves, and it worked. It worked for him to let go of the day. He didn't have to wait for me to tell him to let go of it. But a lot of us, we have a lot of philosophy. And someday we're going to put it to use. When just the right people arrive, finally those spiritual people we've been waiting for, as soon as these assholes get out of the way, and I'm in a better position, then I really am going to have a pretty spiritual life. In fact, I was talking with someone earlier about, someone was saying that they were looking, open for a relationship, and they said, and sort of gave me like, I'm looking for someone sort of like this and sort of like this. I'm very open. She said, but these are just, she said, and I don't say spiritual. I said, no, don't ever say spiritual. That's like the worst. Like you're looking for a spiritual mate. Are you fucking crazy? Some of the most vicious people on earth. Just look for someone kind. It's not spiritual. Someone who's nice. Someone who, what you're really looking for in relationship is someone who will just leave you alone. That's really the highest form of relationship. It's somebody who will just leave you alone. That's like, I did that in wedding vows once, where you're like, I promise to leave you alone. Of course, we don't mean leave you alone bodily. We mean that you don't get that thing that we get where you look at them and go, That's how it starts, right? We meet them and everything's fabulous, and then one day we just go, I don't know. Right? And then then they're not a human being anymore, they're a project. Right? That's what you want, someone to just leave you be the way you are, not take it personally. Terry Cole Whitaker used to say, love is not grounds for a relationship. Takes a lot, because everybody starts out with love. Everybody starts out with love. It's all the stuff beyond the romantic love. And that's what all of this stuff applies to, is that we look to those people and then we start analyzing their motivations and why they're doing the things they are. And we're only doing that because we want to change their motivation, right? I love you just the way you are, now change. So we start to work on them, like I'd be so happy. I mean, that's what we said here, this whole thing of I'd be so happy if someone were different. I would be saved if you would just, if mom would just give me her approval finally, right? Or if my boss would just say what a good job I'm doing, or if my spouse would just say whatever it is that we think, then I would be saved. But those are the bigger things. But, the Four Noble Truths of the Buddha, the first noble truth is that basically life is suffering. But that really is kind of, from what I've heard, sort of a mistranslation. That really what it means is life is dissatisfactory. Because a lot of us don't relate necessarily always to the idea that life is suffering. We might feel like we have suffered at times, or that certain things in our life are making us suffer, but we don't tend to think of, oh, my life is a life of suffering, because they're things that we like to do. No, it's much more accurate to say that life is dissatisfactory. We're always just not quite there. Like there's always just some little thing that, it's all great if only there were more closet space. Right? There's always just that little thing where you just can't really let yourself be here totally in the now, enjoying this just the way it is. Why, that's surrender, that's giving up. I know I shouldn't say this, but what the fuck? I'm here now. Because it's not a judgment on the organization, which I actually think is a fantastic organization. But I have coffee at Starbucks every morning, and there's a exercise place right there, and the people come in a lot of times, and their motto on their T-shirts and stuff is "Never coast." I'm like, that's so fucking American. Never coast. You've got to be striving and working and sweating and straining and going and pushing 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 and pushing, and then when you're done, you will see you've gotten nowhere. You're right where you started. Everything is so aggressive in this Western world. We're so aggressive about everything. We're so, especially LA. The big myth about LA is that LA is laid back. That is so fucking hilarious to me, that LA is laid back. We even took yoga. No, it has to be hot power yoga. There's nothing fucking laid back here. Right? Everything you eat is toxic. It's crazy. That's how we stress ourselves out all the time. And I look at my own life, which is exactly what the Course in Miracles says. Everything in my life that has worked has come when I fucking surrendered and gave up. When I quit. I'm a big quitter. I'm all about quitting. I quit all the fucking time. Right? I do. I quit all the time. I resign a lot of times from this job. I go, I'm not doing this anymore. Actually, I call myself, I say I'm the semi-retired executive secretary to Jesus. I just run his errands for him. I don't take any of it personally. Making his bank deposit today. Sometimes I will say, Jesus, your car needs an oil change. You should do something about that. But I spent years and years struggling and striving and working so hard and being motivated, and literally everything I touched turned to shit. Over and 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 over again. So I resign all the time. I quit all the time. I say, I cannot do this. This is, if you ever read Joel Goldsmith, one of the big Bible verses that are all through his books all the time is, I of myself can do nothing. And part of my prayer every day is, sometimes I will say, Jesus, of myself, I will fuck this up. So why don't you just take over? So I always say, I'm not a motivational speaker. I'm a demotivational speaker. But what I do believe is that when you spend your life following your joy, now, Don't get me wrong. Sometimes when I say that, what people think is, I mean, you are chasing pleasure. I'm not talking about pleasure. I'm talking about following your joy in life. And I don't mean just one joy. I mean in all the various aspects of your life. Joy with walking the dog, and joy with exercising, and joy with all of these things that you look to see, where's my joy there? That's what I'm going for, is joy. Not success, not getting somewhere, not achieving something. So many of the people that we admire in the world, oftentimes when you hear their stories, they weren't trying to get somewhere and achieve something. They were following their joy. They were following something that was calling them not from the outside, but from within, something that was propelling them from within. And this is a town where people come here from all over the world to get something. Well, the universe is nothing but a big mirror. It just mirrors our own consciousness back to us. So when you go into a situation and you think, I'm going to get something, the situation will get from you. It will just mirror that same consciousness back to you. That's why I always tell people, especially even people who come here for the industry, who think, I'm going to get money, I'm going to get success, I'm going to get fame, but they hate it here, forget it. If you hate LA, it will hate you back with such a fucking vengeance. It will leave you along the side of the freeway. You better not be here if you don't love it here. And if you want to be here and you don't love it, figure out how. Start figuring out how to love it here. Because if you love it, it will start to love you back. That's what we just read. You will look within, and that's the world you will project outward. We're always looking at what's the energy I'm bringing here, and really, what's my real motivation? Is my motivation that I'm here to get something, or is my motivation here, I'm here for the joy, I'm here for the peace, here for the expression? And then you just walk through the open doors. You stop smashing your head against doors that don't want you. Doesn't that sound like a relief? To stop trying to get in where they don't want you. We don't want you and your fucking gift, so get out. Right? Because somebody does. Somebody does. I call this the Patrick Dempsey principle. I read an interview with him. I don't even know if this is how accurate this is, because the way I remember things and the way they happened are not always the same. But I read this article. It was an interview with him like maybe 6 or 7 or 8 years ago now. And, you know, Patrick Dempsey was a star in like his 20s, back in the 80s. And he had, you know, lead in a couple of movies, and he was sort of a goofy, gangly kid at the time. And he then didn't work for quite a long time after that and kept trying to get auditions and going in auditions and being frustrated. And he had really, I believe, started out as a performer like a magician. I think he like did magic tricks and stuff at kids shows and things like that. And juggled, yes, all that kind of stuff. And then movie star, then didn't work for a long time. And finally, he said, well, I'm going to stop all of this. And I'm just going to go back to my joy again and why I got into this to begin with. And he started, I think that's when he started racing cars and stuff. And then he started going back to acting class and just acting for the joy of it. And once his joy came back, that's when he started getting called in for auditions and started working again. But see, we always think, after that thing happens, then I'll be joyful. No, once you get joyful, that's when things will start to happen. Right? That's what this lesson is. It says you think that you need things to change for you to feel a certain way, and we're telling you, you start feeling that way, and things will start changing to reflect that feeling. Right? So what we did at the beginning of meditation, then you do that. You say, okay, I'm going in for a meeting this week, or I'm going to see the doctor this week, or whatever it is this week, if there's something, or just in life in general. And you start, instead of thinking about what do I need to have happen there, you start to think, how do I want to feel about this interview? How do I want to feel when I'm at the doctor's? How do I want to feel on this date? How do I want to feel in all those situations? And then you start activating that within yourself now. You don't wait for the situation to determine it. See, one of the things that we do a lot of times is that we bow down to our feelings and emotions, and particularly our moods. Oh my God. Oh my God. Seriously. If you live your life according to how you feel, you will never be everything that you were born to be, because most of the time you won't feel like it. I don't feel like it. I'll wait and see how I feel. Many of us get up in the morning and wait to see how we feel before we decide what we're going to do. And then a lot of times we will also then talk a lot about how we feel. This is how I feel. Do you know how I feel? This is how I feel. I feel like this. I feel this way. I really, really feel this way. I feel this way a lot. I so feel this way. Feel. How are you? Well, anyhow, this is how I feel. So then if how you feel is not good, okay, fine, get that out, then decide, but how do I want to feel? Because the mind just is like, it basically is just organizing information all the time. So if your basic dominant attitude is, I feel kind of depressed today, then your mind begins to organize the day around that. So you go to the closet and you pick out your depressed sweater. You know the one. This makes me feel like shit. Right? Your mind just drags you to all the things that just, oh, that's how we are today, okay. Right? But if instead we say, I feel this, I feel sad, I feel upset, I feel abandoned, I feel betrayed, da, 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 da. Now I surrender all of these thoughts and feelings to the Holy Spirit within me. And I ask that my mind be healed. And here is how I do want to feel. And once you start to set the intention of how you do want to feel, then the mind begins to move in that direction and starts to gather up the evidence to help you feel that way. So if you're feeling really horrible, then usually the choice is not to go from, I'm feeling really depressed or abandoned today, to, I want to feel blissful, right? Something much more gentle than that. I want to feel peaceful. I want to feel not attached to this story. I want to feel less tied to this. I want to feel like I have a little more breathing space. I want to feel just a little more relaxed, a little more open. I want to feel like there's some possibilities, right? That becomes your intention because that's closer to where you are vibrationally, right? We don't go from depressed to bliss. That, a lot of times spiritual people, that's their goal. I'm trying to go from I'm down licking the carpet because I can't even get up or look around or anything. I want to go from there to joy and bliss and freedom. That's not really the journey. The journey from depression is usually anger, right? You're laying, you can't get up, you can't do anything, and you just feel like shit. And then it occurs to you that this isn't your fault. You know whose fault this is. And the next thing you know, you're in the shower. Can't believe no one's going to ever talk to me like that again. I think they could do that. It's not going to be on my watch. Right? So anger. But don't stay there. Then you move up to something more like frustration, or you keep moving up what Abraham calls the emotional scale. You move up a little bit at a time. You reach for something that's within. See, this is the other aspect of this where it's not about us not having any fear thoughts or attack thoughts. It's that we don't defend them and we don't act on them. The Course in Miracles actually says that when we have these thoughts, they're not even our thoughts. It says these thoughts are not my real thoughts. These fear thoughts and attack thoughts are really just ego. I mean, that's something that Kenneth Wapnick, I heard him say one time, where he said, just tell yourself, I'm having an ego attack. I'm having an ego attack. You know, some of you might know Martha Beck, who writes for O Magazine. She's America's life coach. And she's fabulous. I love Martha Beck. She wrote this book called Steering by Starlight. And she talks about what we would call the ego. She talks about the reptilian part of the brain, you know, where all of that survival mechanism is, flight or fight and all of that stuff. And so she says, it's a lizard, just name your lizard. So make it personal so you know when you're dealing with your lizard. And she will do that with clients. She will say, okay, you have to name your lizard. And so what I have is a little winged dragon named Camille that sits right here. Her name is Camille because from the movie with Greta Garbo, where Camille was dying of consumption, because I am both a metaphysician and a hypochondriac. So Camille is always, you know you're dying. You have 10 deadly diseases, and also everybody hates you, and you're fat and stupid and ugly, and you don't amount to anything. And what you also notice about your ego is it hasn't had anything new to say for 30 years. It's like, really? That again? Yes, we're still unlovable and everyone hates us. Thank you, Camille. So you start to realize, okay, that's what, like where the Course in Miracles says, these are not my real thoughts, these are ego thoughts, these are attack thoughts. So you name, like, this is my lizard, or this is my dragon, or whatever, and you say, oh, so what I do sometimes in the morning is if I'm in a place where I cannot get myself to that peaceful, joyful place, I will write at the top of a piece of paper, Camille speaks. And then Camille gets to talk. And she just says all those vicious, horrible things about me and everyone around me and the state of the world and the hopelessness and the despair and the awfulness. That's why the world is the way it is. And you just go, okay, Camille, just get it all out, get it all out, get it all out, get it all out. Then when it's all out, then you just give the dragon a little grape and say, thank you, that's good. You can take a nap now. You've been heard. Okay? And then after that, then I say, now here's what we're going to think. That's Camille's version. Now here's what we're going to think. And then you start to tell a new story. I watched this, I don't know how many of you saw the PBS special Age of Champions. Did anyone see that, Age of Champions? Yes, I watch TV, so you don't have to. Age of Champions is a great story about people in the Senior Olympics. And, you know, when I was little, I was very, very tiny, very skinny, and my father sort of drilled it into my head that I was a very fragile flower. I've never stopped thinking that. I always feel like I'm gonna break a bone or something. It just was hypnotized with this. And many of us we have these limiting beliefs sometimes that we're not even aware of. And so I watched this thing like maybe a month ago, the Age of Champions, and here's this guy who's 100 years old, and he had the nerve to say, I'm starting a whole new phase of my life now. I'm like, what the fuck? Now his daughter was there, and she said, all my life he has always said that he was going to live to be 100. Now, one of the events that he did was tennis. And the guys who were making this documentary, they looked like they were maybe in their late 20s or early 30s. He beat both of them in tennis. 100 years old. Okay, there were two African-American brothers who were like 89 and 93 or something like that, who were swimmers. And they were telling the story that because they were in Washington, they grew up in Washington, they said, you know, when we started swimming, there was no pool for us to swim in because of segregation, and you couldn't swim. So I think they said they swam in the big pool in front of the Washington Monument. They would sneak in there at night and swim in the pool. I love that. Anyhow, they're swimmers in the Senior Olympics, and they swim all the time. And the one, I think the older one, I want you to really ruminate on this. The older one had cancer, and I think he had like a Hickman, where you have the permanent thing to get IV so that he didn't have to put it in and out all the time. He was swimming in between his chemotherapy treatments at like 93 years of age. He would like have chemotherapy one day and then, so he wouldn't swim that day, but then he would swim the next day. And basically what he was focused on and talking about was swimming. Can I tell you the reasons I've had for not going to the gym some days? They were not reasons like, well, I have cancer and I'm 93. It kind of just destroys your story. Right? And then, so after I saw that, then I saw this other woman. I can't even remember where I saw this, online or somewhere. Her name is Ernestine, and she, in her 70s, took up bodybuilding. And she is now, at 75 or something, the world's oldest professional bodybuilder woman. She wears a little sports bra, and you see her abs and her little, seriously. It was so fantastic that I kept seeing these things because then I realized that I'd been telling myself a story about getting older. We start to tell ourselves these stories of decline. Right? It's all, I shouldn't say this, I could be mobbed afterwards, but I will say it because it didn't come from me. It was from Katie Couric's show. They had all these, they had a bunch of couples on and stuff of people who had decided not to have children. And what an outrageous thing that is. But it was these couples who decided not to have children. And then they had a doctor on, this woman doctor on, and she said, that it is a myth that women have a biological time clock. There is physically no such thing. That is all part of the societal consciousness that women are brainwashed into from the time of birth. But it has nothing to do with biology. There is no such thing. Women will feel it as real, but it's from the consciousness. So all the stories that we believe, it was so amazing to me when I realized science is just guessing. Medicine is just guessing. It's good guesses, mostly, but they just take a bunch of information and then they guess. And then they say shit. And then later they take it back. That was our best guess then, now we're guessing this. So we believe all these things about what's possible, and then I started seeing all these old people who were like, they didn't believe any of that stuff, so they just go on and on and on. So you start to look and see, I'm telling myself some horrible story, I'm going to change the story. I'm just bowing down to these feelings, but the feelings are based on the story I'm telling myself. The story I'm telling myself about my relationship, or about my job, or about my body, or about what's possible for me, or about my career. And I'm focused on that instead of focused on what's going to increase my joy, my peace, my love today. What's that story about? That's my intention. How can I tell that story? So then I started writing on my affirmations, I am an athlete. I am an athlete. I am an athlete. I saw this great thing that was written by, he's not with us anymore, but he was, I guess, big at Nike. And he had this motto that was, if you have a body, you're an athlete. Anyone here that doesn't apply to? Right? So you just start to tell yourself a different story. That's what I call going sane. So we start to notice those moments when we go insane. Now we start cultivating moments where we go sane. We start thinking differently. Am I out of time? Do I have any time left? 15 minutes? Holy shit, Helen. That's great. I love that. I could do a whole second talk. So let me talk about the difference between an observation and a judgment. Because a lot of times when we talk about these things, and we talk about not focusing on the guilt in other people and noticing the attack thoughts that arise, an observation is, I'll take a real life experience I had with a friend, where we had a mutual friend who had been in prison a couple of times for stealing. And he just liked to embezzle from whatever company he worked for. But obviously he was not a great thief because he always got fucking caught and went to prison. So anyhow, my friend, so that was here in California. And then this friend of mine moved to New York, and so our friend, the prison person, had gone to New York as well. And my friend was gonna let him stay with him in his studio apartment. Here's one of the things that we tend to do as humans, is we think we're special. Like, he won't steal from me. He's my friend, he won't steal from me. So anyhow, he did let him stay with him, and of course, while he was not at home, he stole all the money that he had in the apartment. And he didn't even wait until the last day he was there, which was really not a clever thief. He stole it in the middle of his stay. So my friend saw that the money was missing, and he was like, so he basically busted him. And so then that was obviously a big rift in the relationship and everything, because he did steal from him. Now, here's how to look at these things. You can look at your friend and say, Bob likes to steal. That's just like what Bob likes to do. He's into that. That's all you need to know. Right? What we read here, you don't go into, I'm going to project what his motivation is and why he's like this and what causes all of that. You just know that Bob steals. That's all you need to know. That is not a judgment. That is you just observing something. Judgment is Bob steals, Bob's an asshole, I hate Bob. People like Bob shouldn't be allowed to be out in public with people like that. I will never trust anyone again. I'm not going to be friends with Bob anymore. I hate Bob. Right? You see the difference? Byron Katie calls this, that dog bites. That dog bites. That dog bites. That's all you need to know. You don't need any fucking story around it, or it's just that dog bites. Right? That's not a judgment. A judgment is that dog should be put down. People shouldn't be allowed to have dogs of that breed. That's an evil dog. Right? I'm getting a petition in the neighborhood. I'm going to be on the evening news this week. Right? Because sometimes people think, well, in this spiritual thing, then you don't, because when the Course in Miracles is saying you don't focus on their errors, that doesn't mean that you have that attitude of, he won't steal from me, I see the Christ in him. Right? No, it's I see the Christ in him, and he has my car. Driving away very fast. You know? That's what Mother Teresa Mother Teresa would say, "Oh, there is Christ in his distressing disguise." Right? So you see that we're taught that you see the innocence in them, but that doesn't mean that you don't notice that they've taken all the good silver, right? You don't notice that your husband is like fucking the nanny, right? I love you, I release you, I would like half of your things in court. Right? Does that make sense? Where you see everybody is, Carrie Fisher used to say, this might even be in Postcards from the Edge, where she said, you come to the realization everybody's a good person deep down inside, but what I'm going to have to deal with is what you have thrust up to the surface. So that's what the Course in Miracles is basically saying is you go on the assumption that everybody is a good person deep down inside, but you're going to have to also deal with what is up on the surface. And you don't need to get all upset about it. You can just observe, here's somebody who makes a lot of promises and they don't keep their word. It doesn't make them a bad, evil, horrible person. It just means that if I'm going to meet them somewhere, I will take reading material. Don't know when they'll be there, right? That you start to, there are things that you realize work in your life and things that don't work in your life. That's basically the little story that Marianne tells in A Return to Love about the guy who stood her up when he went to the Olympics. And she, didn't know what to say to him for a while, and she had to pray about it. And then when he called, he said, babe, I really missed you. And isn't that always what they say? Well, what have you been sending? Smoke signals? Because I'm right here by the phone. So he says, I miss you. I'd like to get together and, go out or whatever. And she said, if you want to get together as a friend, absolutely anytime. And I meant it. But if you're talking about a romantic relationship, no, because we don't do the same dance. That's all. You're not condemning the person. You're not saying, because you're not as evolved as I am spiritually and, really idiot, right? You just realize, okay, we're not doing the same dance, it's not going to work if we're doing a different dance. And so when we read these things, it's not really saying you're not going to notice what's going on in yourself either. That you start to notice also within yourself, without attack and judgment, where you are sabotaging yourself. Without accusation, without shame, without guilt, you start to see, this is where I do the same thing over. I call it going around the bottom of the mountain one more time. We're supposed to be going up the mountain. We're like, we go around the bottom of the mountain one more time. One more time. Right? Where can you read about this? In the textbook on page 666. It says, trials are but lessons that you failed to learn in the past that have been repeated. So where you made a faulty choice before, you can now make a better one and not experience all the suffering that your poor choice made before. So we come around to these places where, for whatever reason, we are in some way immature. Right? And whether we sabotage something at work or with our health or in relationships or whatever. There was a guy who worked at a restaurant that I go to all the time, and he used to people know pretty much sort of what I do just because of the books that I have out on the table a lot of times. And so he was asking me one time sort of about this kind of law of attraction thing of well, why does this keep happening to me? And he wanted to have some big metaphysical reason about why, people always stole things from him. Why is it why? I don't know why this happens and why. I said, because you're fucking careless. That's why. You're careless and you don't pay attention, that's why. You're standing in the gay pride parade on the sidewalk with thousands of people who are in who knows what condition, and you put your new camera down on the sidewalk so you can go, holla! And someone fucking took it. That's careless. And there are all these stories like that, like, oh, and my car was towed. Yeah, you're not supposed to park there. It's called paying attention. And I can't get it back because I have all these tickets. Yeah, so do you see a pattern? Round the mountain one more time. Right? I'd given him money to walk in the AIDS walk one year, and then he came back a week later. Someone stole that money. I was at the ATM, and then they came, and they took the... Pay fucking attention. Right? And then I just saw the other day, he was writing about, I just had the second seat of my bicycle stolen. I'm like, it's some big metaphysical mystery. I have no idea. Some spiritual karmic thing from a past life. You're not doing enough affirmations. You're fucking careless. Right? So we start to look and we see the reason people don't want to admit that is because they feel like they can't do it without shame. They feel like, well, I'll feel bad about myself. The purpose is not for you to feel ashamed and feel bad about yourself. It's just to notice and say, that doesn't work. I keep doing that same thing over and over again, and it doesn't work. I've tried it over. The Course in Miracles talks about this. It basically says that the ego doesn't want you to admit that what you have is an unworkable plan. What it wants you to do is keep saying, it's just not the right people. I'm going to take this unworkable plan, and it didn't work with you because there's something wrong with you. I'm going to do it over here. And then we just go from person to person to person trying to work this unworkable plan, which keeps us just going around the bottom of the mountain, around the bottom of the mountain. And then we can't figure out why. Ask your friends, they know why. They've been dying to tell you. Thought you'd never ask. Right? Because it's just seeing, as we get older, you start to see, okay, this pattern in my life is supportive, it's working, it's helping, this is part of my growth, this is good. This pattern is not so good. I'm not a bad person, I'm not stupid, I don't need to dig into my past and figure out why I'm like this. Is it on the side of the family? There's nothing in scriptures where Jesus came into a situation where someone needed healed and he said, how long have you had it? Do you think it's genetic? Right? In fact, Helen was told at one point by Jesus when she was scribing the Course, he said, are you interested in healing insanity or studying its history? Right? Like just going into the story. So many times we're more interested in the story than the miracle anyhow. There's that whole section of the Course in Miracles that says the ego has no idea what it wants, it only knows what it doesn't want. And a lot of times when you ask people, what do you want, they will spend the next hour telling you how bad things are and how they don't want this anymore. And sometimes it's very hard to get them going in the direction. Yes, but what do you want? There's that wonderful story in Scripture where Jesus goes to where there's that pond or lake or whatever, where once a year an angel comes down and it's invisible, but it touches the water and the ripple goes out, and whoever is the first person that gets in the water is healed. And then everyone else is screwed. Too late. So supposedly, there's some guy who's been laying next to this pool for like 10 years or something like that, and he keeps waiting, and Jesus is strolling by, and he sees this guy, and he says, so, do you want to be healed? Now, what's the answer to that? Yeah, a simple fucking yes. Do you want to be healed? But what's he do? Goes right into his story. Well, what? You don't understand. I've been here for a long time, and the angel is going to come down, and when he comes, I have no one to help me. Other people have someone to help them, but I don't have anyone to help me. I can't. By the time I get down in the water, it's too late. So, Jesus says, arise, take up your bed, and walk. What does that mean in modern vernacular? It means get up, get your shit, and get the hell out of here. Your story is boring. Just go. You either want healing or you want your story, but you can't have both. Did you know that? You can't have your story and healing. Now, the exception to this is, like if you're in a 12-step program and you're going in to tell your story in order to encourage and inspire other people. Otherwise, there's no reason to really tell your story for the most part. The healing comes when you're not interested in your story anymore about how you were hurt and how it was painful and how it was hard for you. You're much more interested in how far you've come and the possibilities. You know, one of the things, I don't know if any of you saw, Jane Fonda's adopted daughter she wrote a book that I think just came out this year, and she and Jane did a lot of the talk shows. And I saw a couple of those interviews, a really good one on Charlie Rose. And she's African American. And she was adopted when Jane was married to Tom Hayden. And she was one of the kids who was at the camp that Jane and Tom had every summer. And she came for several years, and then at a certain point she was molested. And so she didn't come back the next year, but when she came back the next year, she was completely a different person. She was very shut down and all of the things that someone would be if they'd had that experience. And so they talked to her, and she said that this was what happened. And so Jane said to her, if you go back and bring up your grades this year, then if it's okay with your mother, you can come and live with me, because her mother had sort of abandoned them in a sense. She was still living with them, but she was a Black Panther, and she was into politics, and she was really not interested that much in being a mother. And so Jane said, you can come and live with us. And so she did that next year, and she lived with them for years, and then when she got divorced, she went and lived with Ted Turner and all of that, and has, you know, an amazing story to tell, basically. But what really was amazing to me about them talking, was so many of the people would say to Jane Fonda, well, it's so great that you, in fact, this is what's good about Charlie Rose, was he said, well, what really is any different of this than any of these Hollywood movies where, once again, a white person has saved a black person? And so they said, well, that's really not our story. I didn't save her. She basically saved herself. I gave her the opportunity. I'd offered it to other people, but other people didn't take it. Of course, for Jane Fonda, it was not going to affect her at all, right? Like, okay, like one more person in the house was really not going to be a big deal. She's like, she saved herself. She stepped up to the plate, did what she needed to do. Well, after she came, then she said, and really, it was from this that then Jane in Atlanta began all of her work with young girls to eliminate unwanted teenage pregnancy. Because she said what she learned, she said, I learned much more and got much more out of this than she did. She said, because what I learned was that what people need, young people need, or people in general, but young people in particular, is to know they have a future. Because people who are in a situation where there's a lot of young death, where you figure most of your neighbors are going to be in prison or shot in the streets or are going to be teenage pregnancy, they don't think in terms of, will I go to college? Thanks. Will I go to college? Will I... Gotcha. They don't think they have a future, so they make no plans. They don't vision or think beyond right now because they don't think there is a beyond right now. But I think that that's true for many of us when we hit a certain age. We stop thinking in terms of possibility, and we start thinking in terms of what's possible for me now at this age, what I can expect now given how old I am, so on and so forth. But to always have that sense of looking ahead, being absolutely in the now, happy in the now, enjoying the now, and looking ahead, planning for more joy, more love, and more peace. Thank you. Did I do it? Did I do it? Okay. Thank you so much.